Hello, everyone. Welcome to Zia Diplomacy. We're going to be going live and covering some South American news. South American news is pretty underreported, and this is going to be a fun one because this has to deal with a little bit of the shockwave of Trump's victory. So we're going to be covering a little bit of the ties that the European Union has made with South America. We're going to be covering a little bit of Brazil and Bolsonaro. We're going to be covering a little bit of Uruguay, Peru, and Argentina. And we're just going to see where the news takes us. If anything, we're just going to be going over some news outlets and see what's going on. Right here I have Politico. And it says, Franco-German fight over South American trade deal threatens EU rupture. Ursula von der Leyen granted the wish of her native Germany by flying off to seal an accord with the Mercosur bloc. France, which fiercely opposes the deal, is in uproar. Okay. Van der Leyen's first major act in her second term as EU chief executive is inflaming a severe Franco-German rift and threatening to shake the foundations on which the European Union is built. The European Commission president herself, a German, jetted off to Uruguay on Thursday in an attempt to seal a landmark EU trade deal with South America that Berlin desperately wants and that France hates, suggesting that the finishing line for a deal decades in the making was finally in sight. She posted on X, "Let's work, let's cross it." For Germans, that's great news. Increasingly frantic about industrial decline, the Mercosur agreement is a prime opportunity to help find new growth markets for Germany's ailing manufacturing champions. The highly influential VDA car lobby said on Thursday it was of central importance to clinch the deal. For the French, though, the trip is a hatred of the Mercosur deal with Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay, Bolivia, and permeates the whole political class. The French fear the accord will undermine their farmers with a tide of cheap poultry and beef from Latin America. The Paris-Berlin rift is so sensitive to the whole EU because negotiating trade deals is one of the most critical competences entrusted to the European Commission on behalf of the 27 EU countries. Okay, so let's see what's going on in the news. This is DW.
Well, after years of negotiations, a massive trade agreement between the EU and the South American Mercosur bloc appears close to the finish line. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen arrived in Uruguay this week for final talks. The deal would create a huge new transatlantic market, but there have been objections in the EU, especially from farmers.
The trade agreement has always been controversial in Europe, and especially in France. French farmers have been protesting for weeks, fearing they could be overrun and undercut by agricultural imports from South America if the Mercosur deal were to be enacted. France, of course, cannot single-handedly hold the deal, but now Poland has also said it won't sign the current draft. Mercosur comprises Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. Venezuela's membership is currently suspended. The bloc's joint economic product stands at $3 trillion. The 27 countries in the European Union add up to 18 trillion. Altogether, the Mercosur deal would impact 770 million people. The EU and the South American bloc have been talking for a quarter century. Meanwhile, China has massively increased its own trade with Mercosur. Now the pressure is on the EU to finally act. The situation is exacerbated as Donald Trump will become US president, and the EU needs to strengthen its own partnerships in the face of looming US tariffs. The current draft of the EU-Mercosur deal calls for 90% of tariffs between the two sides to be dropped. That would include tariffs on agricultural products like meat and soy, but also car parts that are being sent to the EU from South America, as well as cars, machines, and chemicals being sold from the EU into Mercosur. Still, among the voices protesting the deal are environmentalists. They warn that South America's industry, which is not generally seen as sustainable and puts profits over the protection of the rainforest, could be fired up.
And to talk more about this, I'm joined in the studio now by DW reporter Jules Giesler. You've reported from South America for us. Can you tell us, there's a lot of countries involved in this. This is massive economies. So what is at stake here?
I think what is really important here to begin with is that if this deal finally will be ratified, we're talking about one of the biggest free trade zones created that would cover a market of almost 10% of the world's population. So this is massive. If we look now at the benefits that would have for the different regions, let's start with the Mercosur countries. So on one hand, what we see is they could export meat and grain and import it into the EU with like lower trade barriers, something that has been criticized that we just had in the report from European farmers, because they say they cannot compete with the prices because of lower environmental standards. If we look now at all the criticism aside from the EU, but if we look at what is the EU actually gaining from it or could be gaining from it, we do have three industries that would gain. It's the automobile industry, it's the chemical industry, and it's the pharma industry. But above all, it is important to notice that for the EU, what is really at stake is the access to raw materials that would be crucial for the green energy transition, like lithium, that is used in the creation of electric car batteries. And Argentina is holds the third largest reserves of the world.
So this comes at a time when President Trump is coming back into the White House in the US, and he's taking a very different approach, imposing tariffs on, or threatening tariffs on a lot of countries. And that's basically the opposite of what the EU is trying to achieve here, right?
Absolutely. And it's exactly Trump's protectionism on the one hand, and then China's looming trade war with the EU on the other hand, that is the EU kind of pushing towards a move, or kind of creates a certain urgency now to finally seal this deal after 25 years in the making. So this is one thing. But then on the other hand, also South America, or China's role in South America, is really important here, because we do see that China is South America's biggest trading partner, and we see that Chinese firms are constantly, the influence of Chinese firms are constantly growing on the continent. So there are even experts saying that if the EU does not seal this deal now, it would push South America closer to China when it comes to trade.
Okay. Well, Jules Giesler, DW.
All right. So now we're going to go to the BBC and see what's going on over there. So yeah, this is going to farmers in Europe, and me personally, I don't have an opinion. I just share the news, just sharing the news with y'all. Y'all can come up with y'all's own conclusions. So according to the BBC, EU tries to get closer to South America trade deal. Okay. The European Union has signed a trade deal with 4 of South America's biggest economies. Van der Leyen has called the agreement a truly historic milestone. Okay. If this deal gets ratified by EU states, it means that companies trading between the 2 regional blocs will charge each other lower tariffs, use simplified customs procedures, and it'll give the EU easier access to raw materials. Van der Leyen told reporters in Montevideo, it was in the interest of Europe's citizens. It means more jobs, good jobs, more choices, and better prices. Okay. So it says that last year, Europe sold almost 46 billion euros worth of goods to Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. So the deal is set to grow exports of goods, including cars, machinery, chemicals, and pharmaceuticals at a time when trade tensions are growing with other parts of the world, the US and China in particular. Okay. So nearly $57 billion worth of goods went the other way last year, with minerals such as lithium and nickel, as well as meat and vegetables among the biggest sellers. Those minerals are crucial to the batteries in electric vehicles, and the trade deal will make it easier for European car makers to get hold of huge quantities they are expected in need of the coming years. Okay, so interesting. So here it shows, I'm sure, Vandalay. Um, Malay, Martinez Vandalay. Yeah. Okay. So there's the agreements. There's the ties. So moving on from that, moving on from the EU, we're going to go to something a little more interesting. We're going to go into a little bit of news regarding Paraguay. Now, this is fascinating. And yes, it has to do with China. Here in a bit, we're going to cover a little bit more of China, China's role in South America. But here's one of Exhibit A.
A moral lecture on its ties with Taiwan. The Chinese official also attempted to influence Paraguay's lawmakers by urging them to ditch ties with Taiwan and embrace the one China policy. But after being declared persona non grata, the Chinese envoy pleaded that he was just attending a UNESCO meeting in Paraguay's capital.
My purpose for this visit is to fill in the gap in my map, the one in Latin America from Paraguay to China. It's a great shame. Paraguayans are giving away their profits to intermediaries, but with diplomatic relations with China, you could earn more.
Now, the Chinese diplomat was already warned over his questionable activities after he skipped the UNESCO event, despite insisting that he would be present at the meeting. Instead, the Chinese envoy was seen giving interviews to the media where he urged the country to end all relations with Taiwan.
As for the one China principle, it is a political principle and cannot be negotiated. In other words, in this case, it is not an option to choose China and Taiwan, but between China or Taiwan. In my case, I recommend that the government of Paraguay make the right decision as soon as possible.
Now, after the Chinese diplomat's dismissal, Paraguay's senators said they won't be lectured by Beijing into ending ties with Taiwan and prefer dialogue over arm twisting. Meanwhile, Paraguay's foreign minister said Taiwan was a dependable ally and a trusted old friend.
The relation between Paraguay and Taiwan is based on principles and values: democracy, freedom, human rights, and we are working very close with the Taiwan government in several issues in cooperation about education, health, development, and also working on safety, security issues that is quite important between our two countries. That is not because the United States is asking Paraguay to keep the relation with Taiwan.
Yeah, this guy's based.
That is a very important decision of the government of Paraguay, and the people of Paraguay like very much Taiwan. That is the reality that we have in front of us.
Now, out of the 33 nations in Latin America and the Caribbean, only 7 countries recognize Taiwan and have formal relations with the island nation. In fact, in recent years, several South American countries have cut ties.
So that is those countries that have the relations are Guatemala, Belize. Well, the Latin American and Caribbean countries who recognize Taiwan are Guatemala, Belize, Haiti, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and Grenadines, and Paraguay. Not very much of them.
With Taiwan over pressure from Beijing. In fact, the United States also follows the One China policy and does not recognize Taiwan as an independent state. However, in recent years, Washington's tone has shifted dramatically and has now adopted a policy of providing lethal weapons to Taiwan for self-defense in case of Chinese aggression.
Wild, guys. So yeah, essentially, Paraguay has deported a senior Chinese diplomat, Su Wei, after accusing him of meddling into the South American national affairs. The Chinese envoy was in the Latin American nation to attend a UNESCO meeting, where he did not attend the summit and instead lectured Paraguay over its relations with Taiwan. Paraguay is one of the few nations in the world and in Latin America to have diplomatic relations with Taiwan. Paraguay's foreign ministry declared Su Wei persona non grata and given the Chinese envoy 24 hours to leave the country. Meanwhile, the Chinese envoy said that it was a shame that Paraguay did not have much trade with China. Ooh, Paraguay taking a stance. Nice. Okay, so we're going to move on to Brazil. We're going to be going over some heavy news. With just a little bit of backstory. Police indicted Brazil's former president, Jair Bolsonaro, and 36 others for allegedly attempting a coup to keep the right-wing leader in office after his defeat in the 2022 election, already barred from running again in 2026 for a different case. He could now land in jail and see his influence further diminished. Okay, let's see what's going on here.
It marks another blow to Bolsonaro's goal of running for president in 2026. Brazil's federal police have formally accused the former president of allegedly plotting a coup after he lost the presidential election in 2022.
The final report has been sent to the Supreme Court with a request that 37 individuals be indicted for the crimes of the violent overthrow of the democratic state, coup d'etat, and criminal organization.
It comes after an almost 2-year-long investigation. Presenting evidence including financial records and wiretaps, police said the accused encouraged the armed forces to join a coup. According to a judge, at the end of 2022, Bolsonaro had seen and altered a draft decree to overturn the results of the election and imprison Supreme Court judges. Authorities said some of the accused aimed to assassinate President Lula as part of the plot. Earlier this week, several people were arrested for suspected involvement in the assassination plan. Bolsonaro has rejected the accusations and says he's the target of a political witch hunt. After making unfounded remarks about the country's voting system, the former president was barred from office last year until 2030, a ban he's been seeking to overturn. In the coming days, the police report will be sent to the country's prosecutor attorney general, who will choose whether or not to press charges against Bolsonaro and the others accused.
Wild. So Bolsonaro, as we know, was essentially called the Trump of Brazil. And I'm not Brazilian. I don't really know too much about the perspectives.
They were images that went around the world. On January the 8th, 2023, supporters of Brazil's far-right president, Jair Bolsonaro, ransacked Parliament, the Supreme Court, and the presidential palace. It happened a week after the inauguration of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who defeated Bolsonaro in presidential elections the West said were free and fair. But Bolsonaro claimed the vote was rigged and has never accepted the results. Now, a new report released by Brazilian police claims that Bolsonaro plotted a coup to overturn the election results. He allegedly called a meeting with top military officials in December 2022 and then presented them with plans for a coup. He asked them to join him. But while the Navy agreed, the Army and Air Force declined, and so it never went ahead. The police report says that Bolsonaro actively participated in the creation of the coup plan, being directly involved in the drafting of documents and strategies to remain in power even after the electoral defeat. Police also claim that Bolsonaro had full knowledge of a plan to assassinate President-elect Lula and his running mate. Brazil's chief prosecutor must now decide whether to press charges against the former president and his alleged co-conspirators. Bolsonaro has denied any wrongdoing.
No one is going to stage a coup with a retired general and half a dozen officers. What they are saying is absurd. There has never been any talk of a coup from my side. The word coup has never been in my dictionary. Yet, since I took office in 2019, I have been accused of wanting to stage a coup.
Brazil's president, Lula da Silva, spoke publicly about the alleged coup and attempt on his life for the first time last week.
I'm someone who has a lot to be.
That's pretty wild. I do know that Brazil has most of its elections have been ruled by the left. And I think the left in Brazil is pissed that Bolsonaro is very popular. I do think he's I believe he's a populist. But yeah, he's referred to often as Brazil's Trump. And my opinion doesn't really matter, obviously, but it does seem that Brazil's populist opinion was that of similar to America's, where we're tired, we're done with leftist politics and policies. And it appears that they have their own January 6th situation. But moving on from that, last story that I'm going to cover is more than 28,000 kilograms of explosives, 3,400 IEDs seized in South America. So, an operation in South America has resulted in the seizure of more than 28,000 kgs of explosive materials, 3,400 improvised explosive devices, and thousands of other components used in their manufacture. Operation Claymore brought together law enforcement from 9 countries to target the theft, smuggling, and trafficking of explosives and related materials. This international collaboration, coordinated by Interpol, also led to the seizure of 93,000 meters of detonating cord and safety fuse, 205 grenades, 73,000 detonators, and thousands of kilos of chemical precursors. As a result of the operation, 45 individuals were arrested and several related investigations are still going on. So, authorities in Ecuador inspected a location suspected of storing explosive materials for an organized crime group. On site, police seized 8 C4 explosives, demolition blocks, 30,000 rounds of ammunition of different calibers, 750 cylinders of heroin. Colombian police ran an investigation that led to a raid improvised explosive factories that seized 3,000 IEDs. Wow. So here's the photos. 900 kgs of explosive emulsion were discovered in a truck's cargo. Seizure of detonators concealed inside trucks' air filters. Wow. Explosive concealed inside plastic containers. This is in Brazil. Explosive devices uncovered in Colombia. Wow. In Colombia, seized detonators and IEDs. Checkpoints and seizures as part of Operation Claymore. 5 tons of explosive material were taken into custody in Colombia. This is an explosive projectile seized in Colombia. And these are metal drinking flasks used for IEDs. Wow. Okay. So, everyone, actually, I still have one more story to get into. I think this is the most shocking in a way. But yeah, let's see what's going on here. This has to do with Peru and the Chinese port. Well, Peruvian port and Chinese relations. Let me just get this going real quick. Share the tab. Okay. Okay, so just a little bit. Created a huge port in the Peruvian city of Shanghai, launching an infrastructure project expected to attract more than $3.5 billion in investments and creates a direct trans-Pacific route from China to South America. Wow. Let's watch.
Today, the transportation of goods exported from South America to the Asian market will be shortened to between 25 and 35 days. That means people in Asia can taste the fresher coffee, blueberries, and avocados from Latin America. The port is expected to generate $4.5 billion of annual economic benefit for Peru and create thousands of jobs for local people.
Now with the new port of Shanghai, many opportunities is going to come. It's going to be easier for us to bring our products here to Shanghai and then to China.
For example, Chinese NEVs can be shipped to Peru. In fact, there are NEVs in some of these containers here at the port. The port and new shipping lanes are helpful for the export of Chinese electric vehicles, lithium batteries, and photovoltaic products.
China's financial hub Shanghai, which has the world's largest port, is expected to welcome more goods from Latin America. And from Shanghai, these products will be shipped throughout Asia. Cargo shipped from Peru to China can make a stop in Shanghai and then go to places like Japan, South Korea, and Southeast Asia. From Shanghai to Shanghai, this expression has become quite popular in Peru. It has finally...
Interesting. Popular in Peru, eh? Let's see what the AP has to say. And it's obviously because we're in the States, we don't know Peru's perspective. Most likely, it's probably negative. But the AP says China's president unveils a megaport in Peru, but locals say they are being left out. On the edge of Peru's coastal desert, a remote fishing town where a third of all residents have no running water is being transformed into a huge deep water port. To cash in on the inexorable rise of Chinese interest in resource-rich South America, the megaport of Shanghai, a $1.3 billion project majority owned by the Chinese shipping giant Costco, is turning this outpost of bobbing fishing boats into an important node of the global economy. Crazy. Right here it says considerable income and enormous job opportunities will be generated for Peru, Xi Jinping said from Lima. Okay. Right here it says our fishing spots no longer exist here. They destroyed them, said a 78-year-old fisherman, Julia Cesar, like the Emperor of Rome. Okay, Julius Caesar. Gesturing toward the dockside cranes, I don't blame the Chinese for trying to mine this place for all it's worth. I blame our government for not protecting us. The Peruvian government hopes the port will become a strategic transshipment hub for the region, opening a new line connecting to South America and Asia and speeding trade across the Pacific for Peru's blueberries, Brazil's soybeans, and Chile's copper, among other exports. Probably lithium and nickel as well. Perú.
Han destruido, pues, se han apropiado de una parte del mar.
Sí.
Punto pesquero ya no existe.
Usual fishing spots no longer exist.
Los han encerrado.
They have destroyed the bay.
Han destruido el cerro. Ahí llegaba la corvina, la chita, todo clase de pescado.
¿no? Va a aumentar más el tráfico de personas, drogas, muchas cosas se va a producir, más malo que bueno, ¿no?
More bad than good. Wow. Okay, everyone, that is it from me today. That's South American news. See you on the next one.